your roots. You want to grow, you want to increase, you want to accomplish more. You want to climb. You want to ascend. Those are good things. Something that's alive wants to grow, but don't forget your roots, where you started. The roots are where you come from. The roots are where life is pulled from. Don't forget your roots. We're going to be continuing on in Colossians. If you want to join me in Colossians 2:6, we're going to hear together from God's word His instruction to us to not forget our roots. How do you grow? How do you continue to grow? By leaning in to the things in which truth is found. How do you lean into this truth? How do you hold what's most important? That's where we started. That's our roots. In fact, as we jump in, Colossians 2:6 starts with this word. All right, this word, therefore. Now, we've walked through this before, everybody. When we run into a therefore, we ask, what's it there for, right? Why is this in the text? What Paul is doing here is we're jumping into the middle of a thought. And so before we get to what he's going to instruct us to do, we need to push back to remember why he's telling us to do it. Now, if you remember last week, you remember that Paul talked about how he's in prison, he's suffering, he's striving, he's working, and all of this so that he can cause these people to grow. He can provide the opportunity for the Lord to grow them. He is working hard so that this church can grow. And this is what it means for you and me, that we have hope of growth. Paul talks about how what he wants for Christians, what he wants for the church, is that we would access all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. He says they're all in Christ, all these treasures. And that's what that means for you, like really specifically, that you are wrestling and struggling because you are not enjoying all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. What Paul is saying is inviting us. He's saying, I'm striving and I'm suffering and I'm pouring out myself because I want you to have that. I want you to grow. I want you to experience this real, true thing. So this means that there's hope for you and me. And so coming off of this hope, coming off of this call to grow, he says, therefore, just as you received Christ Jesus as Lord, continue to live your lives in Him, rooted and built up in Him, and firm in your faith, just as you were taught, and overflowing with thankfulness. Now, in this little beginning part of this section, he is creating a bunch of themes that we're going to run into. He wants us to continue in Jesus, in Him. He wants us to trust in Him. He wants us to be rooted in Him. He wants our faith to be built up in Him. He wants us to be thankful for Him. This is about Jesus. It's about being rooted in Him. And he says, these things are what you've already been taught. This is where you started. Don't forget your roots. Don't forget where you came from. That's how you started with Jesus. You started when someone explained to you, hey, you need Jesus. And something inside of you was convinced, and you might have been 4, you might have been 40, you might have been 80. Something came over you, and it was the Spirit of God working to convince your heart, I do need Jesus. And in that moment, some truth rooted down and began to change you. And he says, don't forget your roots. This is where you come back to. Don't forget your roots. Around Westmark, you might hear people talk about being a repentant believer. This is a phrase that we've taken from Jesus' teaching about what it means to be a disciple. And to be a repentant believer means that you're increasingly turning towards Christ, or away from sin and towards Christ. Increasingly. It wasn't just a one-time moment where you wrote a prayer down, or you signed a card, or you went forward to the altar, or you threw your stick in the fire, whatever it was. There was a moment where you began that relationship, but then there's a lifetime of continuing, where you continue to be a repentant believer, where the gospel is still true, and you say, I'm going to turn away from that and turn toward Him, and I'm going to enjoy Him more. Repentant believer. Don't forget that. Root down in the faith and be built up in that faith. That is where your growth will come from. Now, here's the call. Remember, right? Don't forget. Stay here. Hold this. But then Paul is going to warn us. Because as easy as that is to say, okay, that's the imperative, right? That's the command. I'm going to do that. He says, but watch out. There's people who are working against you. Here's a warning, and it was important to them then, and I just need you to follow with me on this because it's important to us today. It's going to take a minute, all right? We're going to have to walk through some things. We're going to put on our hats. We're going to have to understand where Paul's coming from, but I promise it's going to apply directly to you. Verse 8 through 10, Paul writes this, be careful not to allow anyone to captivate you through an empty, deceitful philosophy. That's according to human tradition and the elemental spirits of the world, and not according to Christ. For in him, all the fullness of deity lives in bodily form. And you have been filled in him, who's the head over every ruler and authority. Paul warns us. This is the warning. He says, I want you to root down. Don't forget your roots. But listen, people will lie to you. People are going to lie to you. There will be people who teach the wrong thing. There will be people who intentionally or unintentionally will lie to you about who Jesus is. And if you follow that lie, you will forget your roots. Don't forget your roots. Listen, people are going to lie. And in fact, specifically to them, in Colossae, there's these false teachers coming in. And how do you fight against that? How do you fight against not knowing the truth? Well, hold on. Are you telling the truth or you're not? He says, well, you need to know the truth. Here's the truth. Jesus is fully God, fully man, forever. So we're starting with this big theology, right? We talk about the incarnation. We talk about Jesus being fully 100% God, 100% man, forever. And at first you're like, that sounds like a doctrine. That sounds like great. Okay, that's fine. But listen, if you don't have this squarely fixed, if this isn't safe to root into and secure for you, then down the line, there's going to be massive, massive problems. That's where the passage goes. So listen, start out here at the beginning. Jesus is fully God. Jesus is fully man forever. Because if you don't have that to lean on, guess what? You're in trouble. If you don't have him as fully God who's perfect and can actually earn a sense of like a relationship for you between God, if you don't have him as fully man who can stand to represent you before God, then your hope isn't all that great. And what these false teachers are doing is they're going to say, your hope maybe doesn't have all that figured out, but I do. So now you work for me. You might not have that all gospel whole thing figured out, but tell you what, because you had it a little bit wrong, I have all the right answers. I have this kind of special connection with God. So now I'm going to be above you and you're going to be underneath me. Paul warns people will lie to you. And the whole point of Colossians is that Christ is over all. Jesus is over everything. He's above these rulers. He's above these authorities. There is nothing that you need in addition to him. He's over everything. So Paul is going to jump into the weeds of this argument now. Look at verse 11 through 15. This is a big chunk. We're going to make it though, all right? And then we're going to circle back and explain parts of it. Starting in verse 11, he says this, in him, talking about Jesus, you also were circumcised. Not, however, with the circumcision performed by human hands, but by the removal of the fleshly body, that is, through the circumcision done by Christ. Having been buried with him in baptism, you also have been raised with him through your faith in the power of God who raised him from the dead. And even though you were dead in your transgressions and in the uncircumcision of your flesh, he nevertheless made you alive with him, having forgiven all your transgressions. He destroyed what was against us, a certificate of indebtedness expressed in decrees opposed to us. He's taken it away by nailing it to the cross. Disarming the rulers and authority, he has made a public disgrace of them, triumphing over them by the cross. Now, he's taken several big pieces and he's kind of putting them all together. So here's what we're going to do. Paul takes the argument of these liars and he shows you what it should be. Paul says there's these liars and they're creeping in and they're going to use these hoops for you to jump through in order for them to have the upper hand. They're going to use these hoops as ways that you have to earn whatever, that you have to come into their relationship with this way. You're not quite there, so you need to jump through my hoops in order for you to be there. That will make you a good Christian. And so Paul says, listen, these hoops, that's not what they're for. He starts with circumcision here, and he says circumcision, which was a physical marker of the people of God. It was a physical marker that said God has a special relationship with these people, and these people are walking in obedience in that relationship. He says he's going to refer to these things as a shadow in a moment in these next verses. A shadow. This is pointing towards something later. This is not the fulfillment of everything. This was a marker that says God is setting them apart. He's choosing to make them holy. He's choosing them to be his. And really quickly, Paul just moves right from circumcision. He starts talking about baptism. Like, what are you doing, Paul? Well, he's showing, look, baptism has actually replaced circumcision as a mark of God's people. There was this step of obedience of a physical marker that represented God's people, and he says, now what we have in Christ, who fulfills what that circumcision was kind of talking about, now we have baptism. And baptism is a physical symbol. It's a representation of those things that Christ did. You have to think about this. When Jesus died, think about the physical symbolism here. When Jesus died, he went down into death. And he took the old man. He took me, my old self, the one that was against God, the one that was sinful. I took all that guilt with him, and it died. The indebtedness was gone. The guilt was gone. And then when he came back to life, now there's this new life of a new purpose for a new man. He says, this is you now. And that's what we do in baptism. What we're doing is a physical representation of the spiritual reality behind who we are as Christians. It's promoting this. It's showing this. It's declaring the old sinful me is dead with Christ, and now a new me is forgiven, and I'm with Christ. In fact, next week we're going to have baptisms. We're going to celebrate. I love baptisms. Oh, man. I get so jazzed about baptisms. I do. It's so important. And we're going to have people up here talking about their faith, talking about what Jesus has done. We're going to be showing this. So here's the challenge. You have people in your life who need to hear about Jesus. You should bring them to church next week. We're going to be preaching the gospel. People are going to be up here telling stories about how God changed their life. We're going to be doing baptism. It's going to be a joy. You should come. And you should bring somebody with you. All right. I don't know where I'm going with it. Verse 16. That's where we are. Okay. Verse 16. Paul continues on here, he's going to get more and more specific, right? He started with his theology, and he's sort of explaining how they take a hold of that, and what does that mean, the symbolism, and now he's going to get more specific about how they're applying this. How are these liars sneaking in? What exactly are they doing to control? Verse 16, it says, therefore, do not let anyone judge you with respect to food or drink, or in the matter of a feast, a new moon, or a Sabbath days. These are only the shadow of the things to come, but the reality is Christ. Let no one who delights in humility and the worship of angels pass judgment on you. That person goes on at great lengths about what he's supposedly seen, but he's puffed up with empty notions by his fleshly mind. He's not held fast to the head, from whom the whole body, supported and knit together through its ligaments and sinews, grows with a growth that's from God. So here, let's take a step back. We started this whole thing saying, all right, don't forget your roots. We want to grow. Paul's saying there's hope for us to grow. We, as Christians, we want to grow. You want to improve. You want to see more of God. You want to experience more of what he has for you. And Paul says, okay, don't forget your roots. Continue on in him. But then he warns us, because people will lie to you. And now he tells us a little bit about how, or I guess what exactly they'll do to steal from you. People are going to lie to you in order that they will steal from you the growth that you could have. They're going to steal that opportunity from you. They're going to steal that chance for you to grow. That's what false teachers do. Here's how. Paul says, do not let anyone judge you. Right now, that's kind of an impossible command a little bit, right? Because I can't control if you're judging me or not. Hate is going to hate, right? I can't do anything about that. But this is an interesting use of this word specifically. What he's saying is, I'm not in charge of if you judge or not. I'm actually in charge if I submit to that judgment. Do not let them, another way you could say this is, do not let them condemn you. Do not submit yourself to these judgments that these false teachers have. They say, here's the hoop that you have to jump through. And if you don't make it, I'm going to judge you. I'm going to condemn you. And so then I feel awful because I didn't do it and I didn't live up and they're disappointed. I didn't get the gold stars from them. And oh, man. Why? Because I listened to them. At the very core of it, there was this thought that said, Jesus is enough. And they said, well, almost. Jesus is quite a bit, but you know what you need to do is jump through these hoops. And I didn't do it. And I didn't make it through their specific brand of legalism. And so now I'm disappointed. I've signed up. I've signed up to allow them to steal from me these hoops, these things that I could be growing from. They've taken it. Let me be clear. There are commands in Scripture. And so if I transgress those commands, right, you're not the ones who are going to condemn me. The Scriptures are condemning me, right? So when it says in here, do not be drunk, out of Ephesians, if I go and get drunk, that's condemning me. And if you come and tell me, hey, no, this is wrong, this is not how you're supposed to live, this is not what God has for you, then I couldn't be able to say, oh, you're just condemning me. I say, no, actually, it's pretty clear. Paul did it. There are commands in here that say we should gather together. There are commands in here that say we should sing to one another and encourage one another and love one another. Serving out of gratitude. Those are commands. And so if we are not doing that, this is not the condemnation of other people. In fact, there's commands in here that say hold one another accountable. That's instructed. We're supposed to do that. Hey, what are you doing over there? Stop it. That's not what God has. That's not the heart of Jesus. What Paul's talking about is people who add their own. They add their own hoops to it. No, it's not just what Jesus said, but the little extra things, the little rules, the things that make me feel a little bit better about me because I know I can win that game. Let me give you an example. Since I've worked here, I've been told that it's wrong. Now, not I'd prefer, not one could imagine, but no, it's wrong that I don't preach wearing a tie. You're like, Noah, did you wear a t-shirt specifically to exasperate that point? Yes, I did. Yes, I did. I've been told that. People tell me, I don't like your shoes. And just in a moment of just the Spirit of God overwhelming me, I'm like, I don't care, It just doesn't matter. You ever see those dog shows where they have like the big hula hoop and they have like the one little ratty dog that just like jumps? That's what it is. You should wear a tie. You get a bit different shoes. I don't like the way you said that. I don't like the way you do that. Your kids should do this. I don't like how you think. Your parenting needs, that way you use that money, that way, if they come over, you better hide your alcohol. Jump through my hoops. Because my hoops are the best hoops. My way is the only way. It's the best way. Because if you do it, you'll look like me. People adding, people trying to get you into their brand of legalism. I won't play. And my invitation to you this morning is to not play. It's a losing game. There's no value to it. It's not from the Bible. Why do these things exist anyway? Right? So these things, like initially, a lot of these hoops are not necessarily bad to begin with. Right? The circumcision was God's idea. And here people are using it the wrong way. The idea of wearing a tie to church is like that. Probably comes from a good place. You want to be respectful. You don't want to make it about you. You're trying to encourage reverence for God. All that stuff. That's fine. But what happens is we take those things and we use them to make us feel better about ourselves and make us feel superior to others. And now the thing that was designed to help me worship God, I'm using to try to get people to worship me. Try to protect my own pride. We've forgotten our roots. See, the thing is, when God found me, I didn't have any hoops. I was dead. When God came into my life, I was not somebody who needed to set the rules for other people. I was not somebody who demanded that you do this because I was nobody, and I was guilty. Nevertheless, he rescued me. You forget your roots. And suddenly you're the one in control. You want to ask people to, man, I hope this church gets so uncomfortable. Oh, all these like made up rules that we add. Oh, I just hope this church fills up with people who are dressed like they shouldn't be in church. And I hope all their wily kids are running around breaking stuff. And I hope they make all our small groups awkward because they're sharing about marriage problems. And we're like, I don't know. Why? Because that's real life. That's what happens. That's what happens when people are actually trying to walk and heal with Jesus, is it's messy and it isn't prim and proper and it isn't according to the hoops that we think people ought to. It's not what it is. We do that, though. We allow this legalism to sort of turn us into frauds. Say, no, everybody, you need to act like this perfection of this wax museum of whatever. That's not what it is. It's this hurting people who are trying to heal and trying their best and working together at it. We add those hoops, we forget our roots. The passage Paul is working on here describes this fraud. It's this person who just loves to talk about how holy they are. Paul's example is this person, he says that they love humility. And that sounds like a good thing, right, to love humility. But what he's talking about specifically, that word, it's more like and he describes it later, this like excruciating, like I'm going to go on these incredibly long fasts. I'm going to like force myself, this asceticism, this like monk-like behavior. And that proves how holy I am. I'm trying to earn this thing before God because he would have to give it to me because look how long I suffered through these things. It says, so they kind of make this self-imposed, this self-designed religion, this fake humility, he says, and worshiping of angels. And what I think most likely he's referencing there is people who go through these spiritualist kind of experiences, and then they try to reach out to talk to angels, to worship angels, to have some divine connection outside and around Jesus. Just imagine if you were on a committee with an angel talker. Right? And you're like, we got to decide carpet. I like the gray one. We should. And he's like, well, I was talking to Gabriel, and he's just partial to the Navy. And you're like, I guess we go with Navy. People will have used these spiritual connections, these things to one up. I'm just a little bit closer to God. I'm just a little bit more important. I just have this secret sauce of spirituality. And he's saying that this is a fraud. It's not actually someone who knows God. They've disconnected from the source. And he kind of switches an analogy to a body that part of your body disconnects from your head. And he's like, it can't live anymore. It can't grow. It can't have the godly growth that comes from being rooted in the source of Jesus because it's forgotten its roots. So I said, people will lie to you to steal from you. And that specific thing, if you look here in verse 18, it says, let no one who delights in that humility I was talking about and the worship of angels, don't let them pass judgment on you. This idea of passing judgment is someone lying to sort of condemn you. It's to steal away your opportunity. Imagine you were racing. You're in this heated race, and somebody comes up to you and whispers, and you're like, hey, by the way, they canceled the race. And you're like, oh, okay, dang, all right. And so you stop. And in that stopping, you're disqualified. That's this purpose. They come up to you, they lie to you, and in that lying, they take away from you the ability to succeed. You get your growth stolen. You lost because you believed the liar. You were condemned in these things. They added these extra things. They lied to you, and so they robbed you. It's a trap. Here's the final pieces of Paul's warning, all right? It goes in verses 20 to 23. Basically, he's going to restate his whole argument, and then he's going to force us to apply it. It says this in verse 20. If you have died with Christ to the elemental spirits of the world, why do you submit to them as though you lived in the world? Do not handle, do not taste, do not touch. These are destined to perish with use, founded as they are on human commands and teachings. Even though they have the appearance of wisdom, with their self-imposed worship and false humility achieved by an unsparing treatment of the body, a wisdom with no true value, they in reality result in fleshly indulgence. So take a step back. And let's look at what he said. He said, look, you need to grow, so don't forget your roots. But there's a warning that people will lie to you in order to steal from you so that they can protect themselves. That's this person you need to watch out for. They're creeping into this church in Colossae, and he's like, listen, these people are coming in, they're undermining the truth, and the reason for that is so that they can steal these things from you. They can steal your growth, they can steal your allegiance, they can steal your worship. And the reason they do that is to protect themselves. So he gives us this little peek behind what is actually at the end of all that lying. Because there's sort of a gray scale here, right? On the one end, there are these teachers coming into this church who are saying, look, Jesus is not God. And on face value, that's easy for us to be like, get out of here. But there's a lot of gray scale leading up to that, where people are just, maybe without saying it, slowly, subtly changing the gospel. Yeah, Jesus is God. Sure. But, in order for you to really belong, you need to kind of live the way we do. In order for you to really kind of look the part, in order for you to really please God, there's a couple hoops you need to jump through. And slowly, we're led into this thing where now I'm not trying to please God, I'm trying to please all these people. Paul puts this big bow on the whole thing. I just feel him getting heated in this part. I do. He's like, aren't you a believer in Jesus? Like, don't you believe in Jesus? Then why in the world are you like shoving yourselves down underneath these other things? Why in the world? What benefit could come of this? What is the purpose behind allowing other people to pass judgment on you, to judge you, to condemn you for dumb things that have no value and never will? What is the point here? It's just robbing you of life. It's ruining things for you. Look at verse 23 one more time. He says this, even though they have an appearance of wisdom, the way that they have created this little religion, it appears wise with their self-imposed worship. That word self-imposed really means like self-directed. I made this up. I've designed this to work for me. I built this little religion. And how does it show up? Well, the false humility achieved by unsparing treatment of the body. This is how he describes it, a wisdom with no true value. At the end of the day, what happens? They in reality result in fleshly indulgence. This ends up being, this self-designed religion is an excuse to exercise pride. What they're doing is building a stage for their own pride. And you've seen this before, right? A little kid says, hey, do you want to play this game? And you're like, sure. And there's like, I made it up. And you're like, okay. And then pretty soon, as they're explaining the rules, you're like, I'm not going to win this game. There's no way to win this game. They made all the rules so that they would win the game, and I can't win. And if you start to win, they change the rules. That's what they do. They build the game so that they can win. They hold the hoops in such a way that they can succeed. And everybody needs to look more like them. There's no value. It's just a perfect stage for their own pride. Who are you desperate to impress? Who do you care so much about their gold stars? All these hoops that you're trying for, that if you upset their perfect little ecosystem, it would be such a problem for you. And I want you to trace that back and try to understand, where is Jesus? Where is he? Is this a place based on freedom and based on forgiveness and based on being bought by him? Or is this something that's degraded because, yeah, Jesus is great, but you know what would be better? If you played my game. Whose hoops are you trying to jump through? Don't forget your roots. Jesus has always been enough. I hope that someone here finds some relief in that. That there's been a moment here where the gospel truth sets you free from trying to earn something in that relationship. Where it gives you a little bit more of that just spirit-empowered, I don't care conversation. Where you're allowed to disengage from that. That Jesus is over everything, that you're forgiven and you're safe in here. But here's the thing. Can I tell you a little story here? I was reading this and I hit another side of this. I was studying this passage and I was taken back because there is this warning about these people who sneak in and they lie and they steal and they do it for themselves. And that's true. And pay attention because they're out there. But I ran into another perspective on this. Back in 2018, I was pastoring in Iowa. I was a youth pastor, starting out in ministry, and I was not healthy. I was not healthy. I did what Paul warns about. I designed the game so I would win. I added these hoops. This is how it worked for me. I would work. I would work a lot. I would work all day, and then sometimes I would work all night, and I would just keep going. And I would go home, and I would work on the house that we were remodeling. And I would just read, and I would write, and I'd come up with new concepts and different visions, and things were going great, and I was better, and things were growing, and the youth group was quadrupling. All these kids are coming to faith. We're going to these trips. We're doing this stuff. And every little bit of that success was just another excuse that my pride was working. Because at the root of this was not, I'm working to glorify God. And I can tell you that looking backwards because I know internally my heart was a wreck. My marriage was weak. I was an absent dad. What I had done was I would preach that Jesus is king, and I would tell you I believe that, but then functionally, the way in which I lived told you a different story. Functionally, the most important thing was that I would prove myself, that I would produce, that I would accomplish. Because maybe Jesus isn't all that great. Maybe I wasn't fully safe. Maybe I really did need to win my own game. So that's what I did. And I made the rules so I would win, and all it took was just working harder. Jesus doesn't need to be enough because I'll be enough. So I lied, and I stole that growth, and I did it to protect my own pride. There are liars out there who will try to steal from you, but I think for most of us, the biggest threat to our own walk is ourselves. I think the person who's lied to you the most is yourself. I believed way more. I believe things that I told myself that no one else could ever convince me of. You are the biggest sucker for yourself. We are oftentimes the biggest enemy. The person who makes me forget my roots the most is the one who designs my calendar. It's me. We need to be careful for people out there who are lying, who are trying to control, who are manipulating, and there's some of that you really need to pay attention to. But I want you to look inward, and I want you to try to understand where the legalist in your own heart is. You want to grow? Don't forget your roots. Don't forget your roots. Hold tight to Jesus. Root down in Jesus. You are in Christ. You are accepted by God. Jesus is enough so you can rest in that and ignore anyone who says something different, including the lies and the doubts in your own mind. Some of us, coming off of this, need to draw new boundary lines in some relationships. And there's been things that you've been hearing throughout this going like, man, I am jumping through hoops I shouldn't. And there's some conversations I need to have. And there's some of us who need to face the music that we've been holding up quite a few hoops for other people. And if they don't live this way or look this way or act this way or do this, then I don't really necessarily respect them. It's not your call. Some of us are getting baptized next week. All of us have a step forward, bold faith forward. And we can do that because Christ is above all. And you're rooted in him. So don't forget your roots.